For this chapter, I would just wanted to give you an overview, kind of a summary of what you're going to find in this chapter. Don't get too bogged down when you're reading your chapters. There's just tons and tons of information in these chapters. So read through it, take some good notes, listen to the overviews, do the quizzes, but don't think that you have to memorize the chapters word for word. Just pick out the highlights because it's probably all that you're going to need. Okay, so chapter 17. From the perspective of Europe's future, perhaps the most important development of the 18th century was its leading intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment. Enlightenment thinkers, called philosophes, believed that change and reform were both possible and desirable. Before 1700, a belief in innovation through rational criticism had belonged to only a few pioneering thinkers, but with the Enlightenment it came to characterize Western society. Despite their name, the philosophes were not so much philosophers as men who sought to apply reason and common sense to nearly all major institutions and mores of the day. Leading philosophers disagreed on many issues, but they shared a basic unity of thought. They all sought reform for the sake of human liberty. They provided a major source of ideas that could be used to undermine existing social and political structures. And the philosophers also drew on three main sources for their outlook. Intellectually, they were indebted to the physics of Isaac Newton, which emphasized empirical experience and the rationality of the natural world. They also profited greatly from the psychological theory of John Locke, who had argued that man's nature is changeable and can be improved by his environment. The Enlightenment flourished in a print culture, and in this respect represented the consolidation of trend towards the cultural primacy of print that had been building over the course of the early modern period. Thirdly, politically, the philosophes admired Great Britain, which seemed to exemplify a society in which enlightened reforms served the common good. Voltaire was to the Enlightenment in France as Kant was to the Enlightenment in Germany, and this is one of Voltaire's depictions. The philosophes considered established churches, particularly Roman Catholicism, to be the chief obstacle to mankind's improvement and happiness. Instead, the Enlightenment offered its own creed, deism, which favored a rational deity and a rational morality. Although religious toleration was a positive contribution of the Enlightenment, the philosophers' criticism of traditional religion often reflected an implicit contempt not only for Christianity, but for Judaism and Islam as well. Two Jewish writers played key roles in the debate over religion and the place of Jews in European life, and you'll read about those in this chapter. The publication of the Encyclopedia in the mid-18th century spread Enlightenment ideas throughout Europe, and this is a picture of, it's called Anatomy, and this was featured in Encyclopedia. This ambitious enterprise, the collective effort of over 100 authors, set forth the most advanced critical ideas of the day. The project aimed at secularizing learning and replacing the intellectual assumptions of the Middle Ages and Reformation. The philosophers, however, were primarily interested not in religion, but in humanity and secular values. Through reason, man would discover laws in human relationships similar to those of physical nature, an idea that would form the basis for social science in the 19th century. The philosophers hoped that by discovering social laws, they could remove inhumane practices and institutions. This attitude is reflected in the legal and economic works of the Enlightenment. Legal reformers, such as Jeremy Bentham and the British economist Adam Smith, challenged governmental policies, the latter challenging mercantilism doctrine as selfish and unnatural. The full complexity of the Enlightenment is best revealed in its political thought, though. The philosophers agreed on the need for reform, but not on its methods. The contrasting philosophies of Montesquieu and Rousseau are discussed. The chapter then details the influence of women during the Enlightenment and focuses on this lady, Mary Wollstonecraft. The philosophers were generally not feminist and argued for the traditional role of women. The text also offers an overview of the characteristics of the two major artistic styles of the age. Rococo, which is represented here, was associated with the aristocracy of the old regime, with lavish and placed an emphasis on pastel colors and the play of light. Neoclassicism, which is represented here, embraced by the French Revolution and Napoleon, drew from the Renaissance and the ancient world and was seen as a criticism of the old regime. Most philosophers favored neither aristocracy nor democracy as the solution to contemporary problems. Instead, they hoped the enlightened monarchs would reform society from above, so a top-down approach. The policies of such rulers as Frederick the Great of Prussia, Joseph II of Austria, and Catherine the Great of Russia are detailed in the text. That's Catherine the Great for you. They actually appear to be carrying out the hopes of the philosophers. But in reality, the heroes of enlightened absolutism, as the phenomenon was called, did not wish to reform their countries for humanitarian or liberal purposes, but to strengthen them for future warfare. Like I said, guys, go ahead and read through chapter 17. It may take you a little while to get through it. There's just a ton of information, but that's just a brief overview of the different things you're going to find throughout this chapter. Take your time reading it. Like I said, take notes if you need to. Then when you finish reading it, click on the quiz for chapter 17 and make sure you answer all 10 questions.